It was the kind of day that should have been unremarkable. Wednesday afternoon, I just finished my shift, heading home from work. There wasn't any tension in the air or some big fight we had the night before. Everything looked normal on the surface until it wasn't. I walked into the house, dropping my keys on the hallway table like I always do. The TV was on in the living room, some reality show she loved, but the volume was muted. Her shoes, those bright red heels she bought last month, were tossed carelessly by the door. That was the first red flag. Emily was meticulous about keeping things neat, almost to the point of obsession. She would never leave her shoes just lying around. I headed to the kitchen, expecting to see her there, maybe sipping on that ridiculous detox tea she was always trying. But she wasn't. In fact, the house was too quiet, apart from the low hum of the TV. That's when I noticed her phone, left face down on the kitchen counter. And that never happens. My stomach tightened. It was a strange feeling, a gut punch of realization, but not fully formed yet. Something wasn't right. I couldn't shake it, like an itch you can't scratch. A silent alarm going off in the back of my head. Picked up her phone. The screen lit up. One unread message. It was from someone named Nate, and I had no idea who the hell that was. The preview of the message was still visible. Last night was wild. When can I see you again? Wild, wild. The word hit me like a bucket of ice water. I just stood there, staring at it, the edges of my vision blurring as the pieces started to fall into place. Last night, she had told me she was working late, that some deadline had popped up out of nowhere, and she needed to stay at the office to get ahead of things. I hadn't questioned it. I had no reason to. But now I was questioning everything. I could feel the blood rushing to my ears, the pulse in my temples growing louder with each second. My hand was trembling, the phone still in my grip. Part of me wanted to throw it across the room, smash it to bits, pretend I didn't see anything. The other part, the part that needed answers, made me unlock the phone. I know, privacy. But at that moment, screw privacy. My trust was the only thing I cared about, and it was slipping through my fingers like sand. The message thread opened, and there it was, an entire conversation, the kind of conversation you'd never expect to see between your wife and some random guy. He wasn't just some guy. He was Nate, apparently. The messages were graphic, playful, full of things I couldn't believe she was saying to another man. Photos too. Photos I can never unsee. I felt sick. The kind of sickness that crawls up from your gut and sits heavy in your chest, squeezing your lungs until you can barely breathe. Before I could process what was happening, the door behind me creaked open. I spun around. There she was, Emily, hair still damp from a shower, wearing one of my old t-shirts like nothing had happened. She looked at me, a smile on her face, the kind that made me want to punch a wall. "Hey, you're home early," she said casually, walking toward me. I didn't say a word. I just held up the phone, the screen still lit with her dirty little secret in full view. Her smile froze. Emily's face went pale the second she saw the phone. For a moment, the house was suspended in complete silence. No ticking clock, no background noise, nothing. Just her, staring at the screen in my hand, and me waiting for, well, I don't even know what I was waiting for. An explanation, an apology. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. Her words stumbled out, dripping with fake innocence. "It's not what you think," she whispered, her voice shaky but still trying to sound calm. She reached for the phone, but I pulled it back, not giving her the chance to hide anything. "Not what I think?" I said, my voice coming out rough, like sandpaper. Couldn't help it. Rage was building up inside me like a storm. "Explain that, then. Last night was wild. What part of that am I not supposed to think?" Her eyes flickered with panic. She was quick, I'll give her that. The gears in her mind were spinning at full speed, and I could practically see the lies forming behind her eyes. "Nate's just a friend," she said quickly, taking a step back, trying to put some distance between us. "We were out with some people from work, and, it got a little crazy, but nothing happened. I swear, it's all a misunderstanding." I laughed. I actually laughed. I couldn't believe she was trying to sell me this garbage. "A misunderstanding?" I repeated, feeling the heat rise in my chest. "Really? And what part of last night was wild? When can I see you again?" is supposed to sound like a friendly conversation? What were you two doing? Playing Scrabble. Her expression shifted, just for a second. It was subtle, but I caught it. The flicker of frustration. The way her lips pressed together in that familiar, tight line. She hated when she wasn't in control of the situation. And right now, I had her cornered. She crossed her arms over her chest, leaning into that defensive stance. Look, I told you it was just drinks. I didn't mean for things to come across like that. Nate's got a weird sense of humor, and we were all a little tipsy. That's it. You're making it a bigger deal than it is. I could feel my teeth grinding. So, tipsy people send each other messages about wild nights and making plans to meet again? Do I look stupid to you? She didn't answer. Couldn't really. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for something. An escape, maybe, or another lie that would stick. But there was nowhere for her to go. I had the phone, and the truth was right there on the screen. Still, she kept pushing. Why are you being like this? It's not like I slept with him. God, you're overreacting, she snapped, trying to regain control. I'm allowed to have friends. Since when is that a crime? You're acting like a paranoid freak. Paranoid freak. Those words hit me harder than I expected. It was like she was trying to flip the whole thing on me. Make me the bad guy for catching her in the act. I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, the one I trusted with everything. And all I could see now was a stranger. Yeah, friends? I said, my voice colder than I felt. So friendly you can't even tell me about him. So friendly you're sneaking around, having wild nights, lying about working late and hiding your phone. Sure, that's just friendship, huh? Her face flushed with anger now, the fake calm slipping. She hated being backed into a corner, but she was still trying to claw her way out. I didn't hide anything. You're the one going through my phone like some jealous control freak. I didn't do anything wrong. That was it. I couldn't stand there and listen to her twist this around anymore. My hand tightened around her phone, and I shoved it back at her. You didn't do anything wrong? Then explain this. I scrolled back up through the messages, showing her the pictures, the ones that made me want to vomit. Tell me how sending these to Nate is just friendly. Her eyes flashed, and for a second, I saw the mask fall away. Her lips curled into a sneer, but only briefly. You're unbelievable, she hissed. I don't have to explain anything to you. I said nothing happened, and if you can't handle that, maybe you should think about why you're so insecure. Maybe this is more about you than me. I stood there, breathing hard, my mind racing. Insecure? She was trying to turn this on me, make me feel like I was the problem. Classic move, make the victim feel guilty. I couldn't believe I was even listening to her at this point, but I was trapped in this whirlwind of emotions, anger clouding my thoughts. But then, something snapped inside me. I wasn't going to let her play me anymore. Without a word, I turned around and walked out of the kitchen, heading straight to the bedroom. I grabbed the overnight bag from the closet, started throwing clothes into it with zero care. She followed me, her voice rising, panic seeping into her words now. What are you doing? You're really going to walk out over this? Over nothing. I zipped up the bag, took one last look at her. Standing there, arms crossed, still defiant, still trying to manipulate the situation. And that's when I realized she didn't care. Not really. Not about me, not about us. She cared about being caught, about losing control, but there wasn't an ounce of regret in her eyes. I'm done, I said quietly but firmly. Then I walked out the door as soon as the front door slammed behind me. The weight in my chest shifted. It wasn't relief. It was more like the explosion that had been building inside finally tore through me. I dropped my bag on the porch, my hands shaking as I took a deep breath. The October air was crisp, biting at my skin, but it wasn't enough to cool the fire inside me. I paced the small porch, heart pounding in my ears, my thoughts a chaotic mess. I kept replaying the last 10 minutes in my head. Every word she said, every lie she tried to shove down my throat. Paranoid, insecure. Nothing happened. The way she twisted the truth, tried to turn me into the bad guy. It was like I wasn't even human to her anymore. Just a problem she needed to manage. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, staring at the screen for a second before I realized I didn't even know who to call. My best friend, Jason? He'd tell me to calm down, that it wasn't worth blowing up my life over. My brother? He'd be furious for me. Tell me to leave her and never look back. But the thing was, I wasn't looking for advice. I wasn't even sure what I wanted at that moment. The rage was too fresh, too raw to process anything clearly. Just then, the door behind me flew open with a loud bang. Emily stood there, framed by the doorway, her eyes wild, her face flushed. She had that look, the one that meant she wasn't done. Not by a long shot. You seriously just walked out? She snapped, stepping out onto the porch. You're really going to pack a bag and leave over this? Her voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. She took a step closer, arms crossed over her chest, practically daring me to respond. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure what to say, honestly. I'd walked out to clear my head, but here she was, already dragging me back into the fire. Unbelievable, she spat. You know what your problem is? You're so damn sensitive. One text message and you freak out like a child. You think you can just storm off every time something doesn't go your way. One text message? I repeated, my voice low, dangerous. I turned to face her fully now. Emily, it's not one message. It's the whole damn thing. The lies, the sneaking around. The way you talk to this guy, the photos you send. You've been hiding this for God knows how long. And now you want to act like I'm the crazy one. She rolled her eyes. Actually rolled her eyes. Like I was the one being dramatic. I already told you, nothing happened. You're just being paranoid because you don't trust me. Couldn't believe it. She was still sticking to that same garbage story, refusing to admit anything. My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to keep my voice calm. Paranoid? How about the fact that you lied about where you were last night? You said you were working late. Turns out you were with Nate, whoever the hell he is. So, tell me, how exactly does that fit into your nothing happened story? Her eyes narrowed, and for a second, I saw a flicker of something behind them. Guilt? Maybe. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She was good at this, too good. She shifted her weight, putting on that defensive tone again. I didn't lie. I was out with colleagues. Nate happens to be one of them. You've met him, actually, at the Christmas party. But of course, you don't remember, because you never pay attention to my work life. I froze for a second, trying to recall. There had been a guy at the Christmas party. A tall, broad-shouldered dude with an annoying smirk plastered across his face all night. Nate. Yeah, I remembered him now. He'd made some lame jokes that night, tried to talk sports with me, but I'd brushed him off, figuring he was just some random guy from her team. I never thought he'd be a threat. But now, everything made sense. The late nights, the phone calls she always took outside, the sudden bursts of energy when she came home after one of her work drinks. It was him. You want me to believe this is all about work? I asked, my voice rising despite myself. That you're just out there, getting drunk with this guy, texting him late at night, and that's normal? Do you even hear yourself? She scoffed, her arms falling to her sides as she took a step closer, getting in my face now. It's called networking, Jake. I'm not going to sit at home every night like you. I actually have a career to think about. Maybe if you weren't so busy sulking, you'd get that. I felt the words hit me, each one like a fresh slap across the face. Networking. That's what she was calling it now. There was no remorse in her eyes, no apology, just pure contempt. She was furious, not because she felt bad, but because I dared to confront her, dared to make her look bad. I stepped back, shaking my head. You really think I'm going to buy that? That this whole thing, every late night, every lie, every secret, is just about work? Are you serious right now? Her eyes blazed, and I could see the fury rising in her like a wave. She was losing control, and she hated it. I don't owe you a damn thing, Jake, she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. I told you nothing happened, and if you can't deal with that, maybe you should leave. You know what? Maybe that's the problem. Maybe I'm bored of you sitting around, playing detective in your own little miserable life. Those words hit harder than anything else. Bored. She was bored of me. I took a deep breath, feeling the rage pulse in my veins, but I knew this conversation wasn't going anywhere. She wasn't going to admit it. She wasn't going to apologize. And she sure as hell wasn't going to respect me. Not anymore. So I did the only thing I could think of in that moment. I walked past her, into the house, straight to the kitchen table. I grabbed the notepad we kept there for groceries, quickly scribbling a few words. Then, I tossed it on the table and walked out the door without another glance. As I stepped off the porch, I could hear her voice behind me, rising in anger, demanding to know what the note said. But I didn't stop. I didn't care anymore. The note? It was simple. Just friendly meetings. Huh? I drove around aimlessly for hours after I left the house, the city lights blurring past me as I wrestled with 1,000 different emotions. Anger, betrayal, disbelief. All of them churning inside me, one wave crashing into the next. But under all that chaos, there was something else. Something colder. Something final. As I stared out at the empty streets, I couldn't help but replay her words in my mind. Bored. That one word echoed in my head over and over. It wasn't just the affair, or whatever she was still trying to call it. It was the sheer contempt, the way she'd spoken to me, like I didn't matter, like I was some nuisance in her life. How did we even get here? By the time I pulled into Jason's driveway, it was past midnight. I hadn't called ahead, but that didn't matter. Jason had been my best friend for years. He was the kind of guy who'd open the door no matter the time. As soon as I knocked, the door swung open, and there he stood, rubbing his eyes but looking concerned the second he saw my face. "Jesus, Jake, what happened?" he asked, stepping aside to let me in. I didn't say anything right away. I just walked past him into the living room and sank into the couch, feeling the exhaustion hit me all at once. Jason sat across from me, waiting for me to speak, but I could tell he already knew it was bad. He just didn't know how bad. I took a deep breath, rubbing my hands over my face. "She's been cheating, man." Jason's face tightened, his usually relaxed demeanor shifting into something more serious. "Emily? No way. You sure?" I nodded slowly. "I found messages. Photos. She's been lying about where she's been, about working late. There's this guy, Nate, from her office. I saw it all, Jason. Everything." He didn't say anything at first. Jason wasn't one to jump into things without thinking, and I appreciated that about him. He let the silence hang between us for a moment before finally speaking. "You confront her?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, I did. And guess what? She didn't even deny it, not really. Tried to say it was just friendly meetings. Said I'm the one overreacting. That I'm insecure, paranoid, whatever. Then she hit me with this gem. She's bored of me. Can you believe that? Bored." Jason leaned back in his chair, rubbing the back of his neck. "Damn, man. I don't even know what to say. That's messed up." "Yeah, you think." I shot back, my voice more bitter than I intended. I left, packed a bag and walked out. Left a note on the table saying, "Just friendly meetings, huh?" Jason let out a low whistle. "Good. She deserves that. But, Jake, what's your next move? You gonna go back? Try to work it out? Or?" His question hung in the air, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. My next move. The truth was, I didn't know. Half of me wanted to walk back in there and rip her world apart, the way she'd done to mine. The other half just wanted to walk away and never look back. "I don't know," I said, my voice softer now. "I mean, I thought I'd feel better walking out, but I don't. I feel empty, like none of this is real." Jason nodded, understanding. "Look, man, I've known you guys for years. I get that this isn't something you can just flip a switch on. But you gotta think about yourself now. You can't stay with someone who disrespects you like that. It'll eat you alive." He was right. I knew he was right. But knowing it and accepting it were two different things. I sat there in the dim light of his living room, the silence stretching out between us. After a while, Jason got up, grabbed 2 beers from the fridge and handed me one. I took it, grateful for something to do with my hands, even if it didn't really help. "She ever apologize?" he asked after a long sip. I shook my head. "No, not once. Just kept making excuses. Said I was blowing it out of proportion, that I was acting crazy. She wouldn't even admit that what she did was wrong." Jason frowned, staring at his bottle like he wanted to say something but was holding back. "What?" I asked, leaning forward. "Just say it, man." He sighed, meeting my eyes. "You know what I think? She's been checked out for a while. This guy, Nate, he's just a symptom. The way she's acting, the way she talks to you, That didn't start tonight. You don't wake up one day and decide to be a cheating, lying. He cut himself off, shaking his head. What I mean is, this isn't new. She's been looking for a way out, whether she admits it or not. I wanted to argue with him, tell him he was wrong, that things hadn't been that bad. But deep down, I knew he was right. The signs had been there, I just didn't want to see them. I'd let her pull away, make excuses, brush me off. And I'd let it happen because, I don't know, maybe I didn't want to admit that the woman I loved was gone, that she'd turned into someone I didn't even recognize. Jason leaned forward, his tone softer now. Look, man, you gotta decide what's best for you. If you go back in there and she keeps treating you like that, what's it gonna do to you? You think she'll change? Or do you think this is just who she is now? I stared at the beer bottle in my hand, the cold glass sweating against my palm. I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what I wanted, not really. But what I did know, what was becoming clearer by the minute, was that the Emily I fell in love with was gone. And maybe she'd been gone for a long time. The next morning, I woke up on Jason's couch, the events of the night before rushing back like a bad dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was my life now. I looked at my phone. No calls, no texts. Emily hadn't even bothered to check where I was. She didn't care. I knew, deep down, that whatever this was between us, whatever we once had, it was over. The pieces were too broken to fix. And I wasn't about to spend the rest of my life picking up shards of a shattered marriage. I took a deep breath and made my decision. I was done living in the shadow of someone else's lies. By the time the sun crept through the windows of Jason's living room, the reality of everything had settled into my bones. The kind of cold, hard reality that doesn't leave room for second chances or, maybe she'll change. I sat up on the couch, staring at the pale light filtering in, feeling numb. The night before was still fresh, like an open wound, but the pain was dull now. Just there, heavy. Jason had left for work early, leaving a note on the kitchen counter. Call me if you need anything. Don't let her pull you back in, man. I stared at the note for a while, the words sinking in deeper than they probably should have. Because that's exactly what I was afraid of, that she'd pull me back in. Emily was like that, always knowing exactly how to twist things, how to get under my skin and make me question everything. She didn't even need to apologize. Just one calculated move, and I'd find myself doubting my own reality. But not this time. I grabbed my phone, scrolled through the list of contacts, and landed on the number I dreaded calling. I'd never imagined it would come to this, but life had a way of throwing punches you couldn't dodge forever. My finger hovered over the call button, a lump forming in my throat. Do it, Jake. Don't look back. The phone rang twice before I heard the voice on the other end. Hello, Carlson Law Firm. How can I help you? My voice cracked when I spoke. Hi. I need to speak with someone about filing for divorce. The words felt foreign coming out of my mouth, like they belonged to someone else's story, not mine. But the second I said them, something clicked inside me. A door closing, a line drawn. There was no going back now. I didn't want to, not after last night. The receptionist transferred me to a lawyer named Diane, a sharp-sounding woman who wasted no time getting into the details. So, Mr. Carter, she said, after I explained the situation briefly, have you and your wife discussed the possibility of divorce yet? Or is this your first step? No, I replied, swallowing hard. I walked out last night. She doesn't know I'm calling yet. There was a pause on the other end of the line, like she was measuring her response. All right, I understand how difficult this must be for you, but you're doing the right thing by getting informed first. I'll need some more details to proceed. Finances, assets, any children involved. No kids? I cut her off, almost relieved. If there was one thing that made this easier, it was that Emily and I had talked about kids in the early years of our marriage, but the conversation had always been vague, pushed off for later. Now, I couldn't imagine dragging a child through this mess. Good, she said, sounding brisk but not unkind. That simplifies things a bit. Are you looking for a quick separation? Or are there specific terms you'd like to negotiate? I hesitated, trying to figure out what the hell I wanted from this. My mind kept replaying Emily's face from last night, the anger, the contempt, the way she had looked at me like I was an inconvenience in her life. I felt that bitterness rise up again, but I forced it down. This wasn't about revenge or anger. It was about finally putting myself first. "I just want out," I said quietly, gripping the phone tighter. "I don't care about anything else. She can have the house, the car. I just need this to be over." Diane's voice softened slightly. "I understand, but we'll take it one step at a time, all right? I'll draw up some papers for a no-contest divorce and we can go from there. It sounds like you're ready to move on, but it's important you don't rush through this. Even if you want a clean break, you should still make sure you're protected legally." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yeah, okay. Just let's get this done." We wrapped up the conversation, and when I hung up the phone, the weight on my chest hadn't lifted, but it had shifted. It was strange. There was a finality in those words, something concrete in the fact that I had actually taken the first step toward ending the marriage. But it wasn't satisfaction I felt. It wasn't freedom. It was just a deep, aching sadness. This wasn't how things were supposed to turn out. We were supposed to be forever. I thought we had built something real, something that could survive anything. But in the end, it all came crashing down like a house of cards. And the worst part? I didn't even recognize the person she had become. Maybe I didn't want to admit it, but Jason was right. This wasn't just about Nate or some texts or one bad night. This had been coming for a long time. Emily had been slipping away for months, maybe years, and I'd been too blind or too hopeful to see it. I grabbed my overnight bag from the floor and headed to my car, but instead of driving back to Jason's place, I turned the ignition and made my way toward the house. Our house. I wasn't planning on talking to her. I had nothing left to say, but I needed to grab some more of my stuff and face the reality of the situation. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed her car was still parked there, but something was off. The curtains in the living room were drawn tight, and the place looked eerily quiet. I hesitated for a moment before stepping out, walking slowly up the path to the front door. I hadn't thought about what I'd do if she was home, but I didn't have the energy to fight with her again. I just grab what I needed and leave. Simple. But as I opened the front door, the silence inside hit me like a wall. No TV blaring in the background. No sound of her pacing around on the phone. Just silence. My footsteps echoed as I walked through the house. I headed straight for the bedroom, grabbing some more clothes and stuffing them into the bag. Then I saw it. There, on my side of the bed, lay a crumpled piece of paper. I froze. My heart started racing as I stepped closer and reached for it, unfolding it slowly. It was my note, the one I'd left the night before. Just friendly meetings. Huh? But now, scrawled across the bottom in Emily's handwriting, was a single word: goodbye. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to figure out what that meant. Was she gone? Did she leave? I dropped the note and rushed through the house, checking every room. Her clothes were gone. The bathroom was empty. Even the pictures on the walls, the ones of us from vacations, weddings, holidays, were missing. She had cleared out just like that. It hit me all at once, the cold, brutal finality of it. Emily hadn't even waited to talk. She hadn't tried to explain, or apologize, or fight for us. She just left, like I was nothing, like we were nothing. I stood there in the empty house, the silence now deafening, and realized the truth. I wasn't just ending the marriage. She had already ended us a long time ago. The emptiness of the house swallowed me whole. I stood there in the bedroom, staring at the empty closets, the bare dresser where Emily's jewelry used to be scattered, and that stupid note she'd left behind, crumpled on the floor. Goodbye. A single word, written with the same cold detachment she'd shown me the night before. It wasn't just the house that felt empty. It was me, hollow, like everything I had known, everything I had built, had been ripped away in one violent motion, leaving behind nothing but a ghost of what once was. She was gone. Just like that. I should have felt something. Anger, sadness, relief, anything. But instead, there was just this strange, overwhelming numbness. Like my brain couldn't process it yet. Emily had left, taking her clothes, her things, and the last piece of her respect with her. She didn't fight for us, didn't even try. She'd simply walked out, disappearing from my life as quickly as the trust between us had vanished. I dropped the bag by the bed and sat down, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of it. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. Probably Jason checking in. I couldn't bring myself to talk to anyone right now. Not when my life felt like a bad movie unfolding in slow motion. How had it come to this? The woman I'd shared everything with for years, the one I thought I'd grow old with, had simply packed up and left. No closure, no conversation, just nothing. I couldn't help but think back to all those times we'd laughed together. The plans we'd made, the little moments that used to feel so significant. They all seemed like distant memories now, barely even real. I stood up, feeling the walls closing in on me, and walked through the house like a stranger. The living room, where we'd spent countless nights watching movies and arguing about what to order for dinner, felt foreign now. The kitchen, where she used to tease me about my terrible cooking, was cold, the countertops bare. Every corner of this house was filled with pieces of her absence, and it hit me like a sledgehammer. In the hallway there was a photo, one of the few she hadn't taken. It was from our honeymoon. We were standing on a beach, arms around each other, both of us smiling like we didn't have a care in the world. I remember that day so clearly, how she had laughed when I tripped over a rock trying to set up the camera timer. Her laugh had been real then. The love had felt real. But now, I looked at the photo, and it was like staring at strangers. Who were those people? What happened to them? I pulled the photo down from the wall, not even sure why, and placed it face down on the table. I couldn't look at it anymore. I couldn't keep holding on to what was already gone. I wandered back into the kitchen, grabbed a glass from the cabinet, and filled it with water. As I stood there, I noticed her coffee mug, still on the counter from that morning. It was like some part of her lingered in the house, a shadow of what used to be. I wanted to throw it, smash it into 100 pieces just to feel something, but I didn't. I couldn't even bring myself to care that much. Instead, I walked back to the table, grabbed the crumpled note she'd left, and stared at it again. That word, goodbye. It should have hurt, but all it did was solidify the truth I had been avoiding for too long. This wasn't just about her cheating with Nate, or the lies or the disrespect. It was about something much deeper. We had been dead long before I found those messages on her phone. We'd been going through the motions, pretending to be the couple we once were, but underneath we were both just ghosts clinging to the idea of what we used to be. Goodbye wasn't just her leaving. It was a final nail in the coffin of a relationship that had been decaying for far longer than I wanted to admit. I tossed the note back onto the counter and walked outside, needing air, needing space to think. The sun had set, and the cool night air hit me as I stepped out onto the porch. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the cold cut through the fog in my mind. I stared out into the quiet street, wondering how the world could look so normal while my life had just been flipped upside down. I sat down on the porch steps, staring up at the stars, trying to remember the last time I'd felt truly happy in this house. The truth was I couldn't. Every memory I tried to grasp felt tainted now, twisted by the realization that I'd been holding on to something that wasn't real anymore. I thought about what Jason had said last night, how this wasn't just about Nate, how Emily had probably been checked out for a long time. He was right, of course. It was hard to admit, but he was. I'd been clinging to the idea of her, of us, not realizing that she had already moved on in her mind, even if she hadn't left physically until now. I leaned back, resting my head against the porch railing, and closed my eyes, letting the weight of it all sink in. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there, feeling the strange calm that comes after the storm has passed. She was gone, and there was no point in fighting it. No point in replaying the arguments, the lies, the excuses. The door had closed on us, and I wasn't about to stand there, banging on it, begging for answers I'd never get. Eventually, I stood up and walked back inside. The house was dark, quiet, and for the first time, I realized it didn't feel like home anymore. It was just a place. For walls that used to hold a life I no longer recognized. I grabbed my bag from the bedroom, threw it over my shoulder, and didn't look back. As I stepped out into the night, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, it was going to be without her. This chapter of my life was over, and as much as it hurt to admit, there was a strange freedom in that. No more lies, no more pretending. Just me walking away from the ghost of the person she used to be. Goodbye, I thought, echoing her last word in my mind. This time, though, it wasn't filled with bitterness. It was a release. I got into my car, turned the key, and drove away. Not just from the house, but from everything we had once been. There was no going back now. Only forward. As I drove away from the house. No, that house. I felt like I was leaving behind not just a place, but an entire life. The streets stretched out before me, endless and empty. The faint glow of the city lights in the distance felt like another world. One I wasn't part of anymore. I kept driving, not caring where I ended up. The silence in the car was deafening, but it was better than the silence in that house. I didn't have a destination, but my hands gripped the wheel, pushing me forward. The past few hours, hell, the past few months, had been a blur of lies, accusations, and emotional wreckage, and I couldn't process any of it yet. There was no moment of clarity, no cinematic realization that it was all going to be okay. Just this numb, hollow feeling that crept into my bones and wouldn't leave. I stopped at some random gas station on the outskirts of town, the neon lights flickering above me like a sign from some cheap horror movie. I hadn't eaten since yesterday, and my stomach was in knots. I parked and leaned back in the seat, staring up at the ceiling, trying to remember the last time I felt something other than this crushing weight of betrayal. What now? The question floated in my mind, but no answers came. I got out of the car, the cold air hitting me hard. The dingy station had one of those 24-hour convenience stores, the kind that sold stale sandwiches and questionable coffee. I wasn't hungry, but I walked inside anyway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A part of me felt like I was just drifting, floating through motions that didn't mean anything anymore. The guy behind the counter glanced at me, disinterested, flipping through a magazine. He didn't care. Nobody did. And maybe that was the point. I didn't need anyone to care. This was something I had to deal with on my own. I grabbed a water bottle, paid for it, and stepped back outside, breathing in the night air. The stars were hidden behind a layer of clouds now, and the chill had deepened. Everything felt colder. As I leaned against my car, sipping the water and staring out at the dark highway, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting Jason to check on me again. But it wasn't Jason. It was Emily. For a second, I just stared at the screen, her name glowing in the darkness like a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. The last thing I wanted was to hear her voice, to listen to more excuses or fake apologies. I was done with that, but some part of me, the part still tangled in the mess of our shared history, couldn't resist. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I wanted her to admit what she did. Or maybe I just wanted to hear her say something that would make sense of all this chaos. I answered, keeping my voice steady. What? There was silence on the other end for a beat, and then her voice came through, soft but strained. Jake, I'm sorry. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar surge of anger rise again. The words were empty, hollow. I had heard her say sorry 1,000 times before, for little things, for arguments we used to laugh about later. But this wasn't something a simple sorry could fix. For what? I asked, my voice cold. Sorry you got caught? Sorry you didn't clean up your mess before I found out? What are you sorry for, Emily? She hesitated, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out what angle to take. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she finally said, her voice cracking slightly. I don't know what happened. Everything just got so complicated. And complicated. I cut her off, my anger spilling over. You're calling it complicated? You lied to me. For months, maybe longer. You cheated, Emily. That's not complicated. That's betrayal. I know, she cried, and I could hear the panic in her voice now. I know, Jake, I messed up. I don't know why I did it, okay? Things between us haven't been right for a while, and I felt like I was drowning. I didn't know how to fix it, and then Nate. I nearly threw the phone across the parking lot when I heard his name. Nate. Just hearing her say his name made my blood boil. Stop. I don't want to hear about him. I don't want to hear excuses about how I wasn't enough, or how things got hard. You think this justifies what you did? Because you felt bored. I wasn't bored, she said, her voice breaking now. I was scared. Scared that we were falling apart and that I wasn't enough for you anymore. I know it sounds stupid, but I was afraid you didn't love me the same way, and You were afraid I didn't love you? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The nerve of it. She had been the one sneaking around, sending those messages, doing God knows what with Nate, and now she was turning it around, making it about her fear? Emily, I gave everything to us. Everything. And you threw it away because you were scared? No. Don't try to make this about you being a victim. The silence on the other end was heavy, and for a second, I thought she had hung up. Then I heard a deep breath. I know I messed up, she said, her voice barely a whisper. And I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know what to say. I never meant to hurt you. Well, you did, I said, my tone flat. I was done with this conversation. Done with her trying to twist the knife while pretending to patch me up. Look, Emily, this is over. There's no fixing this. You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything we had. I still love you, she whispered, the words barely audible. But I didn't believe her. Maybe she believed it in her own twisted way. But love isn't supposed to feel like this. Love doesn't leave you hollow and broken. It doesn't tear your life apart while the other person walks away without a second glance. I don't care, I said, my voice hardening. I'm filing for divorce. This is done. There was a long pause, and I could hear her soft breath on the other end, shaky and uneven. She was crying. But I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anything. Not anymore. Okay, she whispered finally, her voice small and defeated. I understand. I hung up, not wanting to drag it out any longer. It was over. The final thread that had been holding us together, frayed as it was, had snapped. I stood there in the empty parking lot, staring at my phone, feeling the weight of what had just happened sink in. There was no turning back now. No more waiting for her to come around. No more hoping for an apology that would change things. The life I had with Emily was gone, and with that phone call I had finally severed the last piece of it. For the first time, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Not happiness, not relief, just clarity. There was nothing left to fix, nothing left to save. The fall was complete. But maybe, just maybe, I was ready to start rising. After I hung up the phone, the silence settled in like a thick fog, wrapping itself around me in the cold night air. I leaned against the car, staring into the distance, waiting for some kind of feeling to hit me. Anger, sadness, regret. But nothing came. Just the same dull, empty sensation that had been gnawing at me since I walked out of that house. Emily was gone. The conversation was over. The marriage, the future I had imagined for us, all of it gone. And I hadn't even tried to stop it. The phone was still clutched in my hand, but I couldn't bring myself to look at it. Instead, I dropped it onto the passenger seat, shut the car door, and started walking. There was nothing but the stretch of empty road ahead of me, and the neon glow of the gas station behind me. My footsteps echoed against the asphalt, each one feeling heavier than the last. With every step, I realized I was walking away from more than just a relationship. I was walking away from the man I had been, her husband, the guy who believed in forever, who trusted, who thought love could fix anything. That man was dead, and I was leaving him behind on this road, along with all the shattered pieces of my life. The truth was, I had no idea who I was now or who I was going to be. But I knew one thing: I wasn't going back. I kept walking, the cold biting through my jacket, but it wasn't enough to snap me out of the fog. My mind kept drifting back to the phone call. Her voice, shaky and small, still echoed in my ears. I still love you. Those words. I didn't know if she even believed them, but part of me did. Or maybe it was just that part of me that still wanted to believe in the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. The woman who wasn't this, who wasn't a liar, a cheat, or a stranger. But that woman didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never had. I stopped walking, standing in the middle of the road, staring up at the sky. The clouds had broken, and the stars were visible now, twinkling faintly above me. They seemed so distant, like everything in my life. The life I thought I had built with Emily was distant now, a memory already fading into the background. What was I supposed to do next? I had no answers, no plan, just this void where our future used to be. There was no going back to the house, no going back to her. And even if I could, what was the point? She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. I turned around and walked back toward the gas station, my breath coming out in slow, foggy clouds. There was a weight on my shoulders I couldn't shake, but underneath it, there was something new, something small, maybe even the tiniest flicker of hope. Not for the past, not for what I had lost, but for whatever came next. I got back in the car, the cold air clinging to me as I sat behind the wheel, staring out at the dark road ahead. The world felt bigger than it had in a long time, like I was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. It was terrifying, but it also felt like a chance to rebuild, to be someone different. I didn't start the car right away. Instead, I sat there, thinking about what Jason had said, about how Emily had been checked out long before Nate ever came into the picture. He was right, of course. I had been holding on to the idea of us for far too long, convincing myself that things would get better, that we could fix it. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had known it for a while, but I just didn't want to face it. Emily had checked out of our marriage, yes, but so had I. In my own way, I had let go of us too. I let the silence between us grow, the distance widening with every passing day. I had stopped trying, stopped fighting for what we used to be. Maybe that's why her betrayal stung so much. Because it wasn't just her that had destroyed us. It was both of us. I reached for my phone again, scrolling through my contacts, and this time, I stopped on Jason's name. My thumb hovered over the call button, and for a moment, I almost didn't press it. But then I did. It rang twice before he picked up, his voice groggy but immediately concerned. "Jake? You okay?" "I'm fine," I lied, knowing he wouldn't believe me. I talked to her." There was a pause on the other end, and then he let out a sigh. "And she's gone," I said quietly. "Left the house. Cleared out. I guess it's really over." Jason didn't say anything right away. He knew better than to throw out some cliché line about how things would get better or how I'd move on. Instead, he just said, "I'm sorry, man." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Yeah, me too. Where are you now?" "Some gas station on the edge of town," I said, looking out at the road. "I don't even know where I'm going." "You don't have to know right now," he said, his voice calm. "Just come back here. We'll figure it out in the morning." There was something comforting about his words. The way he didn't expect me to have all the answers. The way he wasn't trying to fix anything. Just be there. "Yeah," I said, starting the car. "I'll be there soon." The drive back to Jason's place was quiet, the darkness of the night settling in around me like a blanket. But this time, the silence didn't feel so heavy. It wasn't the suffocating kind that had lingered between Emily and me for so long. It was just stillness. I pulled into Jason's driveway, the familiar sight of his old pickup truck parked next to the house. The lights were off, but I knew he'd be awake when I knocked. That's the kind of friend he was. Always there even when you didn't ask for it. I grabbed my bag from the car and walked up to the door, knocking softly. A few seconds later, the door creaked open, and there he stood, his eyes tired but full of understanding. "Rough night," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "You have no idea," I muttered, dropping my bag by the door. We didn't talk much after that. Jason handed me a beer, and we sat on the couch in silence, the TV flickering in the background, some late-night rerun neither of us paid attention to. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence with words. I knew the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. The divorce would come, the lawyers, the division of everything we had built together. And then, there would be the long, slow process of figuring out who I was without her. But for now, sitting here in the quiet with a friend who understood without needing explanations, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness, not relief, but the faintest, smallest spark of hope. The first rays of sunlight peeked through the blinds, cutting through the shadows that had swallowed the living room. I sat there, slouched on Jason's couch, the empty beer bottle resting on the floor beside me. I hadn't slept. Not really. My mind had been racing all night, flipping through memories, regrets, and what-ifs like some broken slideshow. But as the light filtered in, something shifted. The darkness that had hung over me for days, weeks, even months was lifting. Not all the way, not completely, but enough to breathe again. Enough to see a way forward, even if it wasn't clear yet. Jason was still asleep in the armchair, his head tilted at an awkward angle. Couldn't help but chuckle softly. The guy had stayed up with me all night, not once pushing me to talk about anything more than I was ready for. I didn't deserve a friend like him, but I was damn grateful for him. He didn't need to say it, but his presence told me everything. I wasn't alone in this. I got up quietly, slipping outside to the small porch in front of his house. The air was crisp, the early morning chill biting but refreshing. For the first time in what felt like forever, I stood still, letting the quiet of the world around me sink in. No chaos, no screaming in my head, no texts from Emily, no lies hanging over me like a cloud, just stillness. I leaned against the porch railing, staring out at the empty street as the sky turned from deep purple to light blue, the promise of a new day creeping in. And in that moment, I realized something. I had been so caught up in everything I'd lost that I hadn't even considered what I might gain. Yeah, it hurt. Everything about this situation hurt. The betrayal, the lies, the coldness of that last conversation with Emily. It had torn me apart in ways I wasn't even sure how to fix. But standing here with the early morning light warming my face, I knew that, for the first time in a long time, I had control over something. My own life. The marriage was dead. It had been long before I found those messages. Emily had left, both physically and emotionally, and there was no going back to what we used to be. But what I hadn't realized until now was that this wasn't just the end of us. It was the beginning of me. I had been defined by that relationship for so long, by the love we once shared, by the fights, by the constant struggle to keep things together when they were falling apart, that I had forgotten who I was outside of it. But now, with nothing left to hold on to, I was free to figure that out again. Free to start over. The thought wasn't as scary as it had been last night. It didn't feel like a pit in my stomach or a weight on my chest. Felt like a challenge, like an opportunity. For the first time since this whole mess began, I could see beyond the pain. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the contacts again. Emily's name was still there, but this time I didn't stop on it. I scrolled past it, past the memories, past the weight of what she'd done, and landed on someone else. My sister, Hannah. We hadn't talked in a while. Mostly because I had been too wrapped up in my own life, too wrapped up in Emily and trying to keep everything together. But now I needed to reconnect with people who mattered, people who were real and solid, not the hollow echoes of something that used to be. I dialed her number, and after a few rings, she picked up, her voice groggy with sleep. "Jake? What time is it?" "Early. Sorry. I wanted to talk." I hesitated, unsure where to even begin. A lot's been going on. There was a pause on the other end before she responded, her voice softening with concern. "Are you okay?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the last few months ease just a little. "No, but I will be." For the next hour I talked, not just about Emily or the betrayal, but about everything. How I had felt trapped for so long, how I had been losing myself without even realizing it. Hannah listened, quietly, not interrupting, just letting me unload everything I had bottled up. When I finally stopped, she spoke gently, her voice full of the kind of understanding I had been missing for too long. "Jake, I've known something was wrong for a while. I didn't want to push, but I could feel it. I'm sorry you had to go through all this alone, but you don't have to anymore." Her words hit me in a way nothing else had. She was right. I didn't have to go through this alone. Not anymore. I had people who cared, people who would help me rebuild, who wouldn't judge me for falling apart. "I know," I said, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me. "Thanks, Hannah." We talked a little longer, making plans to meet up that weekend, and when I finally hung up, I felt lighter. Not fixed, not healed, but lighter, like I had taken the first real step towards something new. I stood there on the porch for a while longer, watching the sun rise higher in the sky, casting a golden glow over the quiet neighborhood. The world felt bigger now, full of possibilities I hadn't seen before. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about rebuilding, figuring out what came next, and for the first time I was ready to face that. Jason eventually woke up and joined me outside, squinting against the sun, still half asleep. He handed me a fresh cup of coffee, his way of saying he was there, even without words. "You good?" he asked, taking a sip of his own coffee. I nodded, staring out at the horizon. "I think I will be." We sat there in silence for a while, the morning stretching out before us like a blank canvas. I didn't know what the future held, but that was okay. For the first time in a long time, I was okay with not knowing. I didn't need all the answers right now. I just needed to keep moving forward. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to let this break me. I wasn't going to let Emily's betrayal define the rest of my life. I had fallen hard, but I was going to rise from it. Not for her, not for anyone else, but for me. It wasn't going to be easy. There were still days of hurt and healing ahead. But I was done living in the shadows of what had been. I was ready to start living for what could be. And with that thought, I took my first step into the rest of my life.